All right, so for this deep dive, you guys sent in something really interesting. Jake Seal's Wing Chun Grappling.pdf.
Oh, cool.
Now, I gotta say, when you think Wing Chun,
Right.
you probably think like rapid punches and those kind of like unique trapping hands. Not really grappling, right?
Yeah.
So that's what's really interesting about this. We're going to go into like joint locks and all these things that are considered, I guess, China techniques and see how they actually fit in with the more like, I guess, fundamental like pillars of Wing Chun.
Right.
Because, I mean, on the surface, it seems kind of contradictory.
It does. Yeah. I mean, you think of efficiency, you think of directness, like attack, and grappling sometimes can seem to be
Right.
a less direct route.
Yeah.
It can leave you kind of exposed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting to look at how a martial art that's so rooted in striking, can actually sort of incorporate that seizing and controlling.
Okay, so let's unpack that from the beginning. I mean, the document you shared clearly lays out like the principles of Wing Chun, right? We're talking about simple, direct, straight to the point with your movements. Economy of motion, like every single part of your body is being used for a reason. There's no wasted energy.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you attack and defend the center line, right? You never want to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Relaxation is key. You only tense at the point of impact or control. And, of course, using your opponent's force against them. And these all seem absolutely critical to, like, the essence of Wing Chun.
Yeah. They are the DNA of the art. They're what dictates every single movement, every stance.
Yeah.
And so when you get into this idea of grappling, of getting up close and manipulating joints, I think it's natural to be like, wait a minute.
How does this fit in?
Yeah. And the document does say, traditional grappling and joint locks can actually sometimes seem to violate these ideas.
Right.
You might have more complex movements.
Right.
You might leave your center line open.
Yeah.
You might be using, two hands on one limb.
Yeah.
And so that's where it gets really interesting, I think.
Well, and this is where they bring up this term, chinna.
Right.
Which actually literally means seize and hold in Chinese.
Yeah.
And this isn't like, some kind of an add-on. It's apparently like found in most Kung Fu styles. But the Southern styles, which are known for being more close-range combat, like Wing Chun, they tend to emphasize it more. Now, this isn't necessarily the same grappling like you might see in Judo or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something like that.
Exactly. The document emphasizes that the locks and the throws in Wing Chun are about disabling.
Yeah.
So it's high impact, low effort, efficient.
Right.
You're trying to break bones or incapacitate or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because control is a possible outcome.
Yeah.
But it's not the primary goal.
Right.
And it does say that.
Yeah.
And it does say that they kind of loosely categorize Wing Chun Chin into three sections.
Yeah.
Joint locks, throws, and then manipulations, controls.
Okay. So it's not all just about like twisting an arm.
Right.
But then when does a Wing Chun practitioner actually employ these? Because you don't really see, someone in a Wing Chun stance suddenly going for a takedown.
Exactly.
From across the room.
Yeah, no. And the document does say that, it's specific.
Yeah.
It's usually when the opponent is overextended, when they're fully committed, or off balance.
Okay.
And a lot of this comes from their attack.
Okay.
Or from your defense.
Got it.
So you're kind of capitalizing.
So using their momentum against them.
Exactly. You're exploiting that when they're vulnerable.
Okay. What about setting things up? Because a document mentions using strikes to like stun or disorient the opponent and then going into the lock or the grappling maneuver and they actually call those setups.
Exactly. So if your goal is to control the opponent for whatever reason, as opposed to just knocking them out or whatever.
Right.
Then the setup becomes, almost a necessity.
Okay.
Especially if your opponent's wary, if they're skilled. They say that that aiming for a specific chinna on someone who knows what's going on is really difficult.
Yeah.
It's ill-advised.
So it's more about like you see an opening,
Exactly. They stumble after a missed punch.
Okay, now's my chance.
There you go.
to go for the joint lock. Okay. And then it talks about like actually learning this. And they talk about, it's really important to understand like the principles and the concepts behind it rather than just like a big, huge list of techniques.
This is Wing Chun all over, right? It's a principle-based system.
Yeah.
They say that the number of techniques is virtually infinite.
Right.
Limited by imagination and what's practical. But what you really want to get is that why.
Right.
Why these locks work, why these throws work, why these manipulations work.
It all comes back to those principles, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
And they do mention that, any Wing Chun technique has to adhere to those principles, which is effectiveness, using minimal energy, and efficiency of movement.
Yes.
And if it doesn't meet those, then it's not really Wing Chun.
Exactly, yeah.
And what's interesting is they say that Wing Chun isn't like a fixed, unchanging system.
That's right.
It's constantly adapting.
Yeah, things that work are integrated.
Right.
And things that don't are either modified or just thrown out.
Right. Yeah.
And also they talk about how, Wing Chun is slightly different from person to person.
Yeah.
Depending on your body type, your flexibility, you're going to have slightly different ways of applying those principles.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's get into like the actual Wing Chun like what are the criteria that it should meet? The document has like some really interesting points here.
Yeah, this is good stuff. Okay, so first of all, it should be able to cause maximum or minimum damage.
Okay.
So, from breaking a bone to just restraining.
Right.
Secondly, it should allow you to flow between techniques. You shouldn't get stuck trying to force something that's not working.
Got it.
It should not require brute strength.
Right.
Which is, again, Wing Chun. It's all about...
Well, Wing Chun was developed...
biomechanics.
Partially, like, for a smaller person to defend themselves.
Exactly. You're using your whole body weight to apply locks, to apply throws.
Right.
You should be able to control the attacker's root.
Okay.
Their balance.
Okay.
It involves 2 points, worked by 2 hands usually, but not always. A fulcrum and a lever.
Like a seesaw almost.
Exactly.
You have your pivot point and then you're applying force.
Yeah, so you can use other parts of your body as either the fulcrum or the lever.
Okay.
Yep. Your chest, your shoulder, your hips, your feet, whatever.
Yeah.
The point is that you're learning the principles of leverage, not just the specific grip for, an elbow lock or something.
Right.
And then finally, it should be simple, fast, effective, without any superfluous movements.
Right. Okay, so now that we've kind of laid out the principles here, the document, starts categorizing these Chinna techniques based on like what part of the body you're targeting. So the neck and head, the shoulder and elbow, the wrist and finger, spine and hip, knee and ankle. So you've got, quite a range.
It's a pretty good range.
Different types of techniques here.
Yep.
And then they break it down even further by the type of manipulation.
Yes.
So tendon and muscle, cavity or pressure point, and joint or bone.
That's a nice way to break it down.
Right. And then they start getting into like some of the warnings, like especially with the pressure point and the tendon muscle ones.
You got to be careful.
Yeah. This is not something to just like mess around with.
No.
So with pressure point or cavity pressing, they say extreme caution is advised.
Yeah.
Only practice this under the supervision of a qualified instructor. Only work one side of the body per training session. 15 minutes maximum, and not daily.
You can really mess yourself up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with tendon and muscle Chinna, you want to practice at full speed, but no full power, minimal tension, and no more than 30 minutes per session, and a day or 2 break in between. So again, like very specific. And if you're not careful, this is serious stuff.
Yeah. These are powerful techniques.
Now, what might surprise people is that the document actually clarifies that Chinna is found in traditional Wing Chun form.
It is, yeah.
It specifically mentions the movements in Chum Kyu, which is the second form, so it's not like some kind of an add-on.
No.
It's actually woven into the curriculum.
It is, yeah. And it's interesting, because sometimes people will look at particularly Chum Kyu, and they'll just see striking.
Right.
But what they're missing is that
there's grappling.
There's grappling application. Yeah. And so, for example, like some of the bridging hand movements in Chum Ki.
Right.
Those aren't just about deflecting force.
Yeah.
They're also training you to feel your opponent's structure,
Right.
control their limbs,
Yeah.
and create angles.
Yeah.
So something that might look like just a trapping motion
Right.
can be a joint lock,
Yeah.
or it can be a way of controlling them
Yeah.
to set up a strike or another chinna.
Yeah.
And it's not just Chum Ki.
Right.
The document also says that you can find it in other forms.
Right.
Buji, the third form. The Mukyang Jong, the wooden dummy.
Right.
Even the butterfly sword sets.
Yeah, and apparently Buji has a lot of like tendon grabbing, muscle tearing, cavity pressing techniques in it.
Yeah, and then the wooden dummy and Buji both have stuff about pressure point chinna.
Right.
And, even sweeping throws.
Right, right. So it's all very interconnected.
It's all connected.
All these different parts.
Yeah. The strikes help set up the grappling.
Yeah.
The forms contain both striking and grappling.
Right.
And then the wooden dummy's there to really refine your structure and your power generation for those close quarters situations.
Yeah. Okay. So the document then gets into like some specific chinna techniques.
Sure.
So for neck manipulations, we've got figure 4 choke, crank, break, guillotine, lying guillotine, half Nelson, full Nelson.
It's funny how those terms kind of cross over into a lot of grappling arts.
Yeah.
It's the same concepts, but then each art has its own sort of take on how to do it.
Yeah. Okay. And then spine manipulations.
Right.
Horizontal crank, vertical crank, lying extension.
Sounds painful.
It does.
Yeah.
For leg manipulations, leg bar, ankle crank, lying ankle crank, ankle lock. Arm manipulations, we've got like arm bar, standing, lying, elbow lock, shoulder lock, wrist lock. So, pretty much any joint
most comprehensive
that you can think of.
Yeah.
And then it talks about the grips too, because you got to be able to get into the position to apply those locks.
You got to control them somehow.
Right. So they mention palm to palm, palm to wrist, palm to outside palm, interlocked fingers, key lock. And these are the ways that you connect to your opponent, so you can manipulate them.
Yeah.
And then there's, a lot of like Wing Chun hand and leg techniques that also help facilitate this whole process. So we're talking about Huan Sao, Huan Lap Sao, Gum Sao, Pak Sao, TikTok Sao, Jit Sao.
Right. And these aren't just blocks.
Right.
These are ways of controlling.
Right.
For example, Lap Sao, which is pulling hand, can be used to break their balance and pull them in. Okay. For a lock or a throw.
Yeah. And then something like Pak Sao, which a lot of people think of as a block, can also be used
to control the arm. Set up another attack.
And set up something else.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's all like multifunctional.
It is. It's Wing Chun's economy of motion.
Okay. So then they have this overview section at the end.
Yeah.
And it basically like sums up all the key points.
Right.
So first, any Wing Chun chinna has to align with Wing Chun principles. Again, we're back to that.
Right.
It's got to meet those principles.
Yep.
Second key takeaway, Wing Chun's primary focus is still on striking.
Right.
So this chinna stuff is opportunistic.
Yeah, it comes out of the situation.
Yeah. And this is interesting. Aiming for a specific chinna is generally difficult.
Yes.
And not really advisable.
Yeah, you shouldn't go in thinking, okay, I'm going to do a figure 4 choke.
Right.
It's got to come out of what they give you.
Right.
It's interesting. The document says that only the most highly skilled and the least skilled are the ones who are actually looking for specific chinna.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So, you want to be able to adapt.
Right.
You want to understand the versatility of those principles.
Okay. Also, you want to learn to apply this from as many different positions as possible.
Yes, absolutely.
So whether you're behind them, in front, below, whatever.
It doesn't matter. You should be able to do it.
You should be able to do it.
And you should also, equally importantly, be able to escape these holds and submissions.
So, both sides of the coin.
Exactly.
Right. And finally, they say practice, experiment, play.
Yes.
That's how you get good at this stuff. You build confidence.
Yeah. Have fun with it.
Have fun with it.
Explore, experiment.
Yeah. And the limitations are really mental.
And physical, they say.
Yeah. That's great advice for anything, really.
Yeah.
Exploration and play can lead to some really cool discoveries.
Yeah. Okay. So to kind of bring it all together.
Sure.
It seems like Wing Chun, while it's very rooted in striking,
Right.
it does incorporate this really sophisticated system of grappling.
Yeah.
Which is China,
Yeah.
but it's not like the type of grappling where you're going to be like on the ground wrestling for 20 minutes.
No.
It's very much tailored to Wing Chun's core principles.
Oh,
so it's efficient, minimal effort,
yeah.
and it's applied strategically
Right.
when the opportunity is there.
Yeah, you're leveraging their vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
You're capitalizing on those moments to either disable or control.
Yeah. And it all fits
It fits beautifully
with that overall philosophy.
It does. Yeah, it's about using their force and their position against them in the most direct and efficient way possible. Yeah. Okay, so last thought for you guys to think about. We've seen how Wing Chun China is all about principles.
Right.
And it emphasizes that over just memorizing techniques.
Yeah.
So could that be something that you apply to other areas of your life?
Interesting thought.
Like, is it always better to really understand the why behind something rather than just the what?
Very interesting.
Food for thought.
Yeah, cool.
Anyway, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.